All right. Are we working? Yeah, everything's working now. Okay. So, yes, I've been away for a little while. I apologize for that. It's nice to hear from one another often on a regular basis. But I want to let you know what I've been doing because it has a great deal to do with Buddhist practice. How do we practice Buddhism? What is Buddhist practice? Yes, I have talked at great length about the practice of chanting meditation. And before I get going here, I want you to be absolutely clear on this. The most direct experience of your Buddha nature, your essential Buddha nature, your Buddha mind, is via chanting meditation. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo is the most immediate, most direct experience of your Buddha mind. It may take 10 seconds, it may take 10 hours, however you need to bring your mind to focus on Myoho Renge Kyo. And this is the purpose of the Gohonzon. This is why Nichiren created the Gohonzon, so that we would have a focal point, so that visually, orally, and I've talked about this before, you can look it up on other videos, that we can shed the constant din, noise, distraction from our humanness, our human mind of thingness, and experience that clear, unattached Buddha mind. All right, that sounds great. And you've heard that in 1,000 different ways from different teachers. You may have read it in Nichiren's writing, Tendai's, Buddha's teachings somewhere in the scholarship of Buddhism, from Nagarjuna all the way to Nichiren and everything in between, and the Buddhist sermons themselves. That this is our goal. This is what we're going to achieve through our Buddhist practice. So how do you do it? Sounds great. What is it? How do I know I've achieved it? How do I actually get there? Other than sitting in front of a Gohonzon and chanting for hours, what am I looking for? What am I doing? Right? This is the human mind. And it is inordinately difficult to escape that constant human mind. So what do I talk about when I talk about human mind? Now I want to dovetail another critical aspect of Buddhist teachings into this conversation. I want to fold it in. Buddha is quoted as having said in many different ways throughout his teaching that in order to fully experience the Buddha nature, one must study deeply. Not only must one study deeply, but one must study, and this is critical here, all of the Buddhist teachings, as well as all non-Buddhist teachings. Now, what does that mean? So, those who would argue with me about the essential nature of chanting Myoho Renge Kyo to Gohonzon will point to other teachings, other scholarship. And I will remind them, as I have several times, that the Buddha was very clear that you do not understand the essence and the method or the path to your Buddha nature unless you study all of Buddhism. All the scholarship and commentary, all of it. You can't just pick and choose and say, this is it, this is the way. No. How would we put a man on the moon if all we did was cherry pick out of science? Well, I like geometry, but that algebra, You can't do that. So enough on that. But what does non-Buddhist teaching mean? So here's the crux of what I want to talk to you about today. Throughout Buddhist practice, it is essential that you understand that the Buddha nature, the Buddha mind, is something that we can only experience while we are in this human form. Now let that sink in for a minute. The Buddha mind, the Buddha nature, is not something we find out there, outside of ourselves, or even within ourselves. What? It isn't a place we go to. It isn't an alteration of the right frontal lobe. It isn't any of that. It isn't material. It is perceptive. And in order to perceive it, one must have perception. And in order to have perception, one must be in this human form. So I don't know how many ways I can come to this. I've talked about this before, but please understand that your Buddha nature, your Buddha mind, and it is yours. Nobody can hand it to you. Nobody can push you to it or lead you to it. Only you can do that. And that is because it is something that you yourself experience within your human experience. Now, if you really think about that, try to grasp that, then it makes absolute sense that Buddha would say, you must study all of Buddhism and everything else. Well, does that mean I need to be a quantum physicist? Well, maybe for you. But for someone else, it may mean that they need to be a veterinarian. Because we all have our own human genome, our own human DNA, our own human set of tendencies and conditions, which we must navigate and walk through in order to perceive this clear, pure Buddha mind. You don't know, another way to put it is, how can you know what you need to release as far as attachments unless you contend with those particular attachments that are yours? They're not hers or his or theirs, they're yours. So only by disassembling those attachments, casting them away, can you understand what it is to be clear. How else can I say this? If you live underground, creatures at the bottom of the ocean never see sunlight. Yet they develop a way to see, to perceive their environment. Through their own mechanisms and their own tendencies and conditions and their own environment, are they then able to develop these senses? Okay? So for me, I have a deep affinity with science, astronomy when I was a boy, and art. I'm a painter, as most of you know. I'm a painter. And sometimes I take a deep dive away from videos and writing and all of that, and I study and research many sutras, many commentaries, specifically of Buddhism. And other times I take a deep dive into the books of science, astronomy, from Stephen Hawking to currently I'm reading several books by Dr. David Bohm, Bohm, and conversations he's had with Krishnamurti on the nature of quantum, the universe, the mind, what is thought. And I find that every time I do these dives, and lately, before I started reading these books, I went through a flurry of paintings. My investigation in painting is about the nature of how we visualize the world and what those visualizations, how they come about, and how we respond to them, and what questions they raise. There's never any answers in my paintings. They're always about questions and how different people, everyone responds to them differently, including myself. So these are different forms of study / meditations, if you will. Painting can be a very meditative state in the doing of it. In the planning of it and the finishing of it, it's less meditative and more study related. So this is my way of expressing the Buddha's exhortation to study broadly, right? Because this is study, painting, reading books. Maybe for you it's going to a planetarium or hiking great distances, or maybe you're an avid cyclist. I was a cyclist when I was young, and that was a very focused, meditative state. Taught me a lot of my mind-body connection and the world around me. These are all forms of study. It's more critical, not so much what you do, but how you think about what you do. And here we are back at thought. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about thought. Because not only is it an interesting question to think about thought, but it comes up a lot in the study of Buddhism. From teachers that will tell you that meditation is about thinking between the thoughts, or thinking with no thought, or the end of thinking. Even in chanting meditation, we talk about turning off that critical, analytical mind of distinctions so that we can get to some place else. Well, what does that other place look like? So I wanted to give you some everyday examples that will maybe unlock some of this mysteriousness for you, because it's not so mysterious as it is awe-inspiring. Think about a child. This is a very simple example I'm going to give you. It may not be the best, but I think it'll illustrate what I want to say. In my 30s, I encountered the word memes and memetics, and today it's just spouted around without really much discussion as to what it means. So I want to give you an example that not only will explain memetics, but will give you some idea on what is it that we call thought. Where does it come from? How does it manifest, right? If you talk to a chemist or biologist or imperialists that look for life as a profound connectivity of many, many, many discrete processes all happening one after the other in a row, leading to synapses firing electronics in the brain, and therefore, at what point then do we say these are synapses firing and connecting and putting information together, and at what point do we say, oh, now that's a thought, or after 10,400 of them, that's a thought, or when do we call this process a thought? When is an actual thought happening? And what, more importantly, what commits it to that process, right? And in quantum, what we realize is that that's not the way the universe works. You know, if we're playing billiards, we can hit the cue ball into another ball, watch that ball react with the inertia from the previous ball to go in a certain direction, and so on and so forth. And we get that linear, that's real easy. That's our human understanding of the world, this causality and effect, right? That's how we think of cause and effect. But then along comes quantum and says, well, electrons can be here or here, and they can be interrelated with other electrons even if they're not anywhere near them. And if this electron changes in this way, that one will change in this other way, even if they're hundreds of light years apart. How can you even understand that what that blows apart in quantum is this idea of locality. Locality being 1 causes 2, causes 3, causes 4. In quantum, 1 and 100,482 are the same. They happen independently, but at the same time. There's no steps. We don't say this happens, then this happens. We say these happen whether or not they happen. Now we're starting to talk like Buddhists. We're saying things exist, but they don't exist. There is and there is not. And there is not is, and there is not is. And what we're talking about is something fascinating. David Bohm talks about this as wholeness, or the implicate order. In the past, the way that I've encapsulated this is with two concepts. Quiescent energy and potential. So everything from this microphone to you and I, to blades of grass, to the universe in its entirety, exists as a constant potential that either manifests in little bits or stays unmanifested throughout. So it's important to understand. Let me say this another way. In Buddhism, we don't have this huge, vast, empty universe with occasional things in it. What we have is a completely full, expanding because it's hugely containing life. And there are these little moments of little pieces, portions of that life expressing themselves materially. But it's not emptiness. It's anything but emptiness. It's potential. It's completely everything. And we are just small manifestations of that everything. This is the concept of oneness that's often misunderstood in Buddhism. And in order to perceive that wholeness, that space between the electrons, if you will, that no 1, 2, 3, 4, but what the 1, 2, 3, 4 exists in, not the spaces, but what it's happening in. You may remember an example I gave of the universe as not being this explosion of something, but rather like a little drop of color, food coloring in a huge, vast fluid. When that drop hits the fluid, it disperses. But it's not that the space in between that drop dispersing is empty. Rather that it's dispersing into. Do you follow? And it's fascinating for me to find these dialogues between Dr. David Bohm and Krishnamurti, because in their own way, they're talking about this very thing. And I found that fascinating, so that's why I'm reading that. But back to my example, yes, I'm getting back to my example of the memes. Think of a child, 3, 4 years old, just grappling with language, hearing a couple older siblings or adults talking about how this other person they know just seems to be self-destructive. Everything they do, it seems like they should know ahead of time that this is not going to work out for them. And yet they devote they just throw themselves at activities, whether it's personal, financial, or whatever it is. And they always end up just falling apart. Nothing works out for them. And the child is listening to this, and it's far too complex and abstract for the child to understand. But at some point, one of the adults looks at the other adults and goes, "Yeah, loser." Boy, that sticks. There's a visual, there's a sound to it. It's wow, that's cool. I know something the adults are talking about. And the very same day, a little later on, that young child is playing with another child, and they play a game as children do, and there's always a winner and a loser in games. And when somebody loses the game, the child had heard this from the adults says, "Loser," and really throws it at this other person. And this other child, like, confounded, like, "Why are you so excited about me? Yeah, I lost. We win and lose all the time. But why suddenly today is it like this demonstrative symbol and dance and noise? And what is the significance of this?" And suddenly I feel more depreciated because he's laughing or she's laughing and dancing around, "Loser, loser." Now, I don't need to tell you that it just takes one cycle of the clock for perhaps in kindergarten or with several other children. Yes, okay. Sorry about that. Got interrupted by a limitation. I've been dealing with limitations of my computer and laptop, and this is also another reason why I took a break. I'm still waiting to accrue enough of your donations and other selling paintings or something so I can get the money together to get a good video editing station together so I stop having this problem. My computer crashed some time ago and just... Anyway, long story short, I apologize. So, moving on. So now this child and several children will hear that this will spread like a virus, right? And all these kids will be walking around, "Loser, loser," and they will have achieved a significance to that little mimetic word and symbol that has nothing to do with the intricacies of what the adults were talking about in a self-destructive personality that is constantly trying and attempting to do things maybe improperly, maybe insufficiently, for whatever reason, they are constantly failing in the eyes of the general, all of those things. So you get that person gets labeled a loser, but these children have no concept of that vast societal construct of what is success, what is failure, what is continual or self-imposed failure, all those things, right, that come along with losing. Well, we may be in a day today in 2020 where most adults don't even understand that. And they'll use that, loser, like it's some great faux pas of your own nature, that you're a human loser, that you can never get above the pale, that you are irredeemable. And that's a hell of a thing to implant in a young mind, and then have to deal with societally, without even understanding what's going on. And it will become a fait accompli, because eventually that child moving into young adult and teenager and so forth will hear that as a complete dismissal of their own personal value. And that may be somewhat what is meant by that term, ironically enough, but it will come about in a very undifferentiated way. It will just be a vast umbrella statement that will oppress and damage and hurt. And so this is what brings us back to thought. How does that teenager now, who feels so downtrodden and terrible about themselves, understand this issue that they really don't have? How did this thought process establish a knowing of evaluation of self that is somehow inescapable. See, that what I'm pointing to is the way we construct the mind of self. This is our samsara. This is what Buddha called the samsaric reality. It's our human nature to accrue these value judgments and distinctions in our environs and apply them in a strange way to our own valuation and what we are, our sense of self. But it's not true. It's not real. It's a manufactured self. And over years, from the time we're not able to really abstract what we're doing with thought, to our formative years of this is who I am, this is how I'll be, these are thoughts that I cannot dismiss, to our adulthood where we're now operating in this vast matrix of mimetics and thoughts and memories that are all constructed with these fallacies of who we think we are. So you go back to mimetics like, I think, therefore I am. Who among us hasn't heard that? We don't even know where it's from anymore. We don't care. We just have this, I think, therefore I am, which somehow imbues many to think because I have a functioning mind or brain that somehow achieves this thing I don't understand called thought, that makes me me. Well, yeah, but do you really understand what that means, what you're saying? Because the me that you are this moment, if you walk around the corner and bump a picture frame off a shelf with your shoulder and the glass breaks on the floor and the glass goes in between your toes and slices your foot, you're suddenly a completely different me, because in that instant, your brain has also decided that you're somebody with a scar, you're somebody who may bleed to death, you're somebody who's in critical need of help and injury, you may have lost a toe. All of these things are going through your head before you've even looked down to see how bad the damage is. So on the one hand, we construct our image of self over many years of accruing these ideas of what's going on in the world around us and applying it to ourselves. And on the other hand, in an instant, less than a moment, we can construct a completely alternative reality to what we think we are. This is what I believe Buddha was trying to dissect by making reference to the monkey mind, jumping from branch to branch. That not only does it jump from branch to branch and instantaneously change its complete worldview of itself, the mind, but the human mind, but it also is, don't forget, the monkey isn't something new. It's something that's been around for as long as we can know and remember. So it's a pre-existing condition that is doing this thinking. This pre-existing condition is a source of our thoughts. How do we understand that pre-existing condition? How do I get down to that pre-existing condition and disassemble it, turn it off, get underneath it, prevent it? This is where we need to find our Buddha mind. This is what all the language is about in meditation, about obstructing this mind of distinctions, this mind of constructed mimetics, what a mouthful, so that we can get to something that's essential, that's pure. By doing that, what we want to achieve, of course, is minimizing the effects of all these monkeys, of all these other mimetics. Because if we can get beneath them to their source, they'll still be there, but they'll cease to have so much significance. They won't direct our actions as much, and hopefully over time at all. We'll just witness them and look at the monkeys. And they won't affect the way we see ourselves. This is the achievement of Buddhahood in this form, in this human form. Okay, I've talked about this in other ways, in other videos. I hope that this video is different. I hope I've opened some kind of a pathway for you to understand the nature of Buddhist practice. Yes, it's essential that you do chanting meditation, but the more you understand about why that's essential, the more effective it becomes. So yes, I answered an email recently, a comment recently about, I'm not a study person, so can I practice Buddhism? Can I get anything out of it? Yes. Because, as I hope I've indicated by this video, everything we do, as long as we do it with effort, with mindfulness, that we understand and watch our actions, we are studying, we are practicing Buddhism. The more we can effectively understand how and why we do things, not so much why, but the how. How do I come about these thoughts? How do I come about labeling situations in this way? Do I just idly repeat what I've heard? Or do I have some more intuitive, self-created reality here? I hope this video was useful for you, and I'll get back to Nichiren's Gosho. But I felt I needed to say something new about this in July of 2020. Please take good care of yourself. Go to Cocoscope or Patreon, TLK or Cocoscope TLK, and support any way you can. If not, I make these videos available to you for free because my sharing, my experience, and my study with you is another way for you perhaps to study. This may be your only connection to study, and so I feel very responsible for doing this, and so I don't really want to charge you for it. But if you can support my endeavor in any way, it will help me create and put out more of these videos. And together, we, the Sangha, can grow in our practice and get to our Buddha nature all that much faster. Deep, deep appreciation for you. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Take care of yourself, especially these days of coronavirus. But always be vigilant. Study any way you can. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Bye for now.